In this video, we'll walk through the first phase of API management, the build phase. Let's say you're an API developer at Acme Chocolatiers, and you want to build a new API and expose it to your external partners and customers to fetch inventory and pricing information for an item from multiple internal systems, say inventory count from Microsoft Business Central and pricing from Shopify. You can do all of this efficiently in Celigo. From the Celigo homepage, you can click here to start creating the API by adding a name and version. This will take you to the API Builder canvas. Let's open the API request node, where you can configure the HTTP method, relative URI, and other request parameters, such as the path and query parameters. Similarly, you can configure the HTTP response code and body in the API response node for both success and error. Next, you'll want to ensure that the API request parameters required in your business logic are added in the transformation step. First, let's edit the mock API request with some test data. Preview the changes. And then, here in the transformation step, add the required path and query parameters. Let's add a lookup step to fetch the inventory information from Business Central. You can either create a new step from scratch or select a pre-built step. Configure the connection, view the mock input to this step, update the path and query parameters for this API endpoint, and preview the data. Let's add the results mapping to pull in a few fields from the lookup, like the item name and inventory count, which you'll need to generate the API response, and the Shopify ID, which you'll use in a downstream step. You can add an input filter here to validate the incoming item ID. For example, if the ID doesn't exist in Business Central, you can return an error. You can also add branching to fetch inventory details from another system, like NetSuite, based on a request parameter. Next, we'll add another lookup step to fetch pricing information from Shopify using the ID we mapped earlier. Save your changes and map the pricing data here in the results mapping. Last, you'll want to use the response node mapping to map the source record fields to your final API response fields. Now that the API is built, you can test it using the mock API request. Click the Test API button, and it works. Ultimately, if you are building APIs you intend for app developers, who can be your partners, customers, or even internal users, to consume them to build or enhance business applications. Let's see how you can use an external tool like Postman to see that API in action. Copy the endpoint and test it using Celigo's API token for authentication. Provide the path and query parameter values, and send a test request. We get a 200 response, as we would expect, and the payload looks fine as well. Celigo's API Builder automatically logs every API invocation. No manual setup needed. You get visibility into headers, payloads, and even error logs all out of the box. The API engine is optimized for high throughput and low latency, and there's no need to worry about traffic spikes. Celigo's backend scales automatically. Now, exposing backend APIs like this to external consumers, securely and at scale, is tough without the right tools. That's where Celigo API management comes in. Click Push to APIM to start. Add a context path, HTTP method, and endpoint path. Celigo automatically generates the Open API specification and sends it to the API management console. Click Push, give it a second or two, and voila! Your API now appears in the API management console. From there, you can review and edit the API name, version, and description. Choose a category and start the API. By default, the API management console automatically adds all the configurations required for the API gateway to work. View the backend service URL, gateway URL with the context path in entry points, and the endpoint path in Policy Studio. See default policies like override HTTP method and transform header, which inserts your Celigo API token automatically. Check the plans section to manage access limits and API subscriptions. In the documentation, you'll find the auto-generated OpenAPI spec, which enhances the clarity and usability for app developers. Finally, let's switch to debug mode and verify that the API request is successfully proxied to the backend. And as expected, the response comes through just fine. With just a few clicks, you've seen how to go from building a backend API to securely exposing it as a fully managed API, laying the foundation for scalable, secure, and developer-friendly API management with Celigo.